Tensions peak within Mali's military as the ruling junta cracks down on what it claims was an attempted coup from within its own ranks. Authorities have arrested dozens of soldiers accused of plotting to overthrow the junta, which came to power itself through two coups in 2020 and then 2021.
The alliance of the Sahel States, a bold new experiment in African sovereignty, is under threat. But not from the West, and not from regional powers like ECOWAS. No, the danger comes from within. Forces inside the member states are quietly plotting, aiming to destabilize governments and topple military leaders who dare challenge foreign interference. Why does this matter? Because if just one military leader falls, the fragile unity of the AES could crumble, leaving the revolutionary bloc vulnerable and fractured. Case in point, in Mali, authorities recently arrested 2 top military generals and over 30 soldiers, all suspected of orchestrating a coup. This shocking move reveals a painful truth. Not everyone is happy with President Assimi's leadership. The question now is, what does this mean for Mali and for the AES's fight for African sovereignty? On August 7, 2025, the streets of Bamako, Mali's bustling capital, were shaken by startling news. Under the direct orders of Colonel Assimi, Mali's elite security forces launched a sweeping operation, rounding up dozens of military officers accused of plotting to overthrow the country's top military leadership. Early reports spoke of just 20 arrests, but sources close to the situation claimed the number exceeded 50. Among those detained were 2 top generals, including Abass Dembele, a former military governor of the northern region of Mopti. Dembele, a respected figure in Mali's armed forces, was taken from his home in Kati, a garrison town just outside Bamako, in the early hours of Sunday morning. Known for leading from the front, he earned the admiration of soldiers under his command. His reputation was forged in the crucible of conflict, the Northern War of 2012, when Tuareg separatists allied with armed groups to seize over 60% of Mali. The Malian army's failure to reclaim the territory prompted France to deploy thousands of troops, marking one of the most turbulent chapters in Mali's recent history. Critics of Mali's military leadership are now sounding alarm bells. They say the recent wave of arrests exposes a deep rift within the armed forces, suggesting that Colonel Goita's grip on power may be weakening from within. In other words, while Goita holds the title of head of state, his control over the military is far from absolute. According to these observers, the tension stems largely from Colonel Assimi's recent policies, which are widely seen as targeting dissenters and shrinking the civic space in an already unstable country. One glaring example came in July, when Assimi's government approved a controversial bill that could allow him to extend his presidential mandate for 5 years, renewable indefinitely, without holding any election. Earlier in May, the military regime had dissolved political parties, banned organizations, and prohibited political gatherings, triggering a wave of condemnation from opposition politicians and human rights groups alike. These moves, critics argue, not only deepen divisions within the military, but also paint a troubling picture for Mali's fragile democracy, raising urgent questions about the future of governance in the country. Beyond the arrests of military officers, critics argue that the government is now targeting outspoken political figures. Just this month, former Prime Minister Moussa Mara was arrested and charged with undermining the credibility of the state after he visited political prisoners and spoke out for justice. On July 4th, Mara had posted on social media, "As long as the night lasts, the sun will obviously appear. We will fight by all means for this to happen as soon as possible." Words that now seem almost prophetic in the face of his arrest. The crackdown doesn't stop there. Choguel Maïga, another former prime minister under the military leadership, has publicly accused Goita's government of targeting him. Maïga, removed from office in November last year, was once a loyal supporter of Colonel Assimi Goita, championing the military government and its policies. But the alliance fractured when Maïga openly criticized Goita's handling of the transition back to civilian rule. Suddenly, allies become enemies, and loyalty offers no protection. For Mali, this internal turmoil paints a grim picture of a nation where power struggles are intensifying and dissent is met with force. Speaking to his supporters, Choguel Maïga didn't hold back. He openly criticized the lack of transparency in Mali's ongoing transition. The transition was supposed to end on March 26, 2024. but it has been postponed indefinitely, unilaterally, without debate within the government, he declared. This is not normal in a government, he added, revealing that as prime minister, he wasn't even informed about the junta's decision to delay elections. Maiga warned that this confusion and uncertainty could spell serious challenges and risks for the entire nation. It was after this public criticism that Maiga was removed from his position. Since then, he has remained a vocal critic of the military government, but the situation escalated further. Last month, the government accused him of fraud and embezzlement during his time in office and launched a formal investigation. And just days ago, Maiga's lawyer revealed shocking news. He had been taken into custody on corruption charges. Once a trusted ally, now a target, in Mali, even the most prominent voices are not safe when they challenge power. With all this unfolding, the root of the tension becomes crystal clear. The military government in Mali has no immediate intention of returning to civilian rule, but not everyone shares this vision. Some Malian politicians, most notably former Prime Minister Choguel Mayiga, are pushing for a swift return to democracy. They are agitating for civilian governance, demanding that the military step aside. Following the recent arrests, critics and many in the Western media have begun crafting a narrative that the people of Mali are growing tired of military rule, that this is a moment for Colonel Assimi Goïta and his government to step down. But this is a misleading story. The reality is far different. The discontent does not come from the streets. It comes from politicians and former power holders, those who feel sidelined by the military. These are the voices agitating for a return to civilian rule. And now, with political parties dissolved and the transition extended to a 5-year term under military oversight, these politicians have realized that civilian governance is not coming anytime soon. Faced with this reality, their opposition has grown louder, more public, and more vocal, but it does not reflect the mood of ordinary Malians. In short, the unrest is political, not popular. A clash between the old elite and the revolutionary military leadership trying to reshape the country. In our view, it is these very politicians and political parties who may be quietly stirring unrest within the ranks of the military, hoping to orchestrate a plan to remove Colonel Assimi Goïta from power. Think about it. As civilians, they lack the authority, influence, and resources to overthrow a military government on their own. The only group capable of executing a regime change is the military itself. So what is their strategy? To convince or manipulate elements within the military to stage a coup, one that could install a new head of state. But here's the catch. This new military leader would likely be more sympathetic to a rapid transition back to civilian rule, opening the doors for these politicians to reclaim their offices and influence. Yet, in all this scheming and plotting, there's a larger question looming. What would happen to the Revolutionary Regional Alliance, the alliance of the Sahel State, the AES, if the military leadership changed hands? Could this fragile bloc survive another shakeup, or would it unravel under political pressure? The answer is uncertain, but one thing is clear. The stakes are higher than just one country. The future of the entire AES hangs in the balance. As you know, the alliance of the Sahel states, the AES, was born from necessity. 3 military leaders, each facing the same brutal realities at home, decided to pool their resources and forge a path towards security and economic stability. These countries share a painful history. For decades, they have been exploited by Western powers, France in particular, leaving them among the least developed nations in Africa. And all 3 are locked in a constant battle against insecurity, violence, and political instability. But beyond shared struggles, there's something even more critical: the ideological alignment of the military leaders themselves. They place the sovereignty and independence of their nations above all else, refusing to bow to Western pressures. Instead, they are charting their own course, building partnerships with non-Western nations, and fighting for fuller control and greater benefits from their natural resources. Western media may label them power-hungry, but the reality is far different. These leaders possess what many African democratic governments lack: backbone. They have repeatedly shown that they demand respect from foreign powers, and unlike many elected officials, they receive it. This is the new face of African leadership, one that refuses to be dictated to, one that refuses to accept the crumbs left behind by global powers. And this very determination makes the AES a force the West cannot ignore. Now, as we mentioned earlier, the AES was born from a vision shared by three extraordinary leaders: Captain Traoré, Colonel Assimi Goïta, and General Tiani. Together, they set out to solve the pressing security and economic challenges that have long plagued their nations, and so far, their record is nothing short of remarkable. The AES now commands an army of 5,000 highly trained soldiers, equipped with advanced weaponry to confront terrorism head-on, and they have already scored multiple victories. But their vision extends beyond the battlefield. The AES has its own judiciary, its own bank, and is actively planning its own currency, laying the foundation for a new, independent regional economy. Yet, despite these successes, the alliance's future is fragile. Imagine for a moment, what if one of these military leaders were suddenly removed from power? Consider the consequences if Colonel Assimi Goïta were overthrown. There's no guarantee that the next leader, whether military or civilian, would uphold the vision of the AES. It's entirely possible that a new leader could be pro-Western, beholden to old colonial powers, or eager to return to ECOWAS influence. If that happens, what becomes of the policies already implemented in Mali, including the expulsion of French forces and the consolidation of national sovereignty? What happens to the AES itself? The future of the Sahel's revolutionary alliance hinges on these leaders remaining in power. Remove one, and you risk a vacuum that could undo years of progress in an instant. Can you now see how the removal of any of the military leaders will be a huge problem? The military leaders know this, and that is why none of them are eager to transition into civilian rule. They know what is at stake. The question is, why don't these politicians and political parties allow Colonel Assimi Goïta to build the vision he has for Mali with the other AES countries? Why are they so eager to return to civilian rule? Is civilian rule better than military rule? For decades, democracy has been touted over and over as the best form of government by Western institutions and Western leaders. In theory, they are right because democracy has to do with giving the majority of the people a chance to elect a leader for a specific period. This leader is usually elected through direct voting by the people, or indirect voting, as it happens in a parliamentary system. But the truth is that the democratic system in Africa is flawed. This is why, despite practicing democracy for decades, the continent has nothing to show for it. In some countries, one leader has been ruling for more than 20 years under the so-called democracy. And throughout this long period, the leader and his cohorts keep getting richer while the country remains poor and underdeveloped. In some other countries, where free and fair elections are practiced to an extent, the condition in the country remains the same. The president of Botswana explains it clearly. He said some African presidents have great visions for their countries, but most of them are unable to achieve this vision because of the bureaucratic system. So ask yourself, does returning to civilian rule guarantee a better future? Or is it just a distraction from building real independent strength like what Colonel Assimi and the AES are trying to achieve? Consider this. In a civilian system, the president's word is not law. Every decision must pass through layers of politicians, many of whom may disagree or block initiatives that do not benefit them personally. Years may go by, and when that president eventually leaves office, they might have nothing tangible to show for their term. But what about the military? Yes, we understand that military rule in Africa between the 1960s and 1990s was often disastrous. The absolute power wielded by military leaders led to corruption, political violence, and widespread human rights abuses. Take Sani Abacha, Nigeria's military ruler, in 1993. His reign was marked by theft on an unimaginable scale, and decades later, much of that stolen money has still not been recovered. Beyond corruption and abuse, military rule also carries the risk of internal instability. Simply put, a military leader is always at risk of being overthrown by another military officer, creating sudden crises and political turbulence. Because of these dangers, military regimes have historically been frowned upon, while democracy, despite its flaws, has been embraced as the legitimate path for governance in Africa. This is exactly why some Africans remain skeptical of leaders like President Traoré, despite all that he has achieved. Many voices in Burkina Faso insist that Traoré should quickly return to civilian rule and organize elections. Political parties echo the same sentiment, demanding a return to democracy. And this mirrors the situation in Mali with Colonel Assimi Goïta. Now, on one hand, their argument seems valid. Military rule, by its nature, is always fragile, constantly threatened by internal strife. Take Thomas Sankara, for instance. He rose to power through a coup, implemented reforms that stunned the world, yet his rule was brutally cut short. He was overthrown and assassinated by a fellow soldier, Blaise Compaoré, backed by France and the West. Blaise, of course, transitioned into civilian rule almost immediately. And in that guise, he ruled for 27 years without facing any real threat to his power. Contrast that with President Traoré. As a military leader, he has survived countless assassination attempts and coup plots, the latest reportedly on April 16, 2025. Colonel Assimi Goita's experience is no different. He has faced multiple coup attempts himself. What does this tell us? For AES leaders, the threat of being overthrown is ever present. External powers know this and often exploit divisions within the military to orchestrate coups. And here lies the dilemma. The day these leaders feel completely secure enough to transition to civilian rule may also be the day when Africa's flawed democratic systems reveal themselves in full force. Bureaucracy, corruption, and political paralysis waiting to choke their vision. If the AES military leaders were to transition into civilian rule, the risk to their vision of sovereignty and independence is enormous. In fact, the vision of the AES could collapse entirely. And the reason is simple, but often overlooked. Under democracy, a president's word is not law. Every decision must pass through layers of politicians, many of whom may disagree or actively block initiatives that don't serve their personal interests. Years can pass, and by the time a leader leaves office, they may have achieved very little, no matter how ambitious their vision. In contrast, as military leaders, the AES heads wield absolute authority. Their decisions are executed immediately. This is why, in just a few short years, President Traoré has been able to accomplish so much. Want to launch nationwide agricultural programs? Done. Need to buy military equipment for the Burkinabe army? Done. No approvals, no debates, just action. Command becomes reality. So, given this situation, is it not better for the AES leaders, including Assimi Goita, to remain in a military regime for the time being? There are still a lot of things to be done in Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger. There are a lot of imperialist systems that need to be destroyed. A quick return to civilian rule would simply be a quick return to the way things have been. They will continue to practice sham elections, there will be corruption, and the insecurity will remain. If those politicians truly love Mali and want to see Mali become a great nation, they would drop their ambitions and support Colonel Assimi Goita to the end. But will they? What do you think? Let us know in the comments section below. Don't forget to like this video, drop a comment, and subscribe to our channel.